because they're feet on the ground in those communities, so they can gather people together for these programs. But it also needs that that you have to have private enterprise in it. And it's not necessarily about just giving people jobs. It's about the development of communities. There are some that I like, some models that I like, and some that I don't. As far as what you do, I tend to not like the ones that use eminent domain to take people's homes and do something along those lines as community development. I like to see grassroots individuals trying to make their world a little better. And you can't think of a better model than to get people who have a very difficult time. They don't have computers. They don't have access to the internet. I've done training all over our tri-state area, and you'd be surprised when I asked about who has a computer, how many people in construction don't have access to computers. Right. I tell them to go to libraries. Last summer, I had a few Spanish kids in a class, Hispanic kids, and they were out of work. And I said, look, I do some OSHA safety. And I told them, look, go to a public library. It's beautifully, it's climate controlled. You can go on, and I showed them how to just ask for a librarian to get them on a website. And they went to OSHA.gov, and next thing you know, I bump into those two kids on a job site in Brooklyn, New York. And they're telling me about some of the standards that they learned. That's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for people to learn and pick themselves up. When government picks people up, they don't really pick them up, they prop them up. And if you prop up someone, they're gonna use that prop as a crutch. But when you allow the free enterprise, and you know what, Michael, and we've had these discussions, I know it can be a bumpy road, and people have risk and they could fail. But we have to allow people that risk. If we don't, what are we? We're just propped up by something, and it becomes a crutch.
Do you know of any place where this type of program has been tried, not necessarily identical to what you've written about in our book and on our website, but using some of the basic principles? Do you know of anybody who's been creative enough to look at that?
Well, it depends how you want to go with that. Philosophically, you could say that there were certain people thrown out of Europe, and they sought shelter in a new land, and they built a new country. So philosophically speaking, yeah, you could have people who are abandoned, who are castigated out of their societies, like say convicted criminals would be. And you know what? They fared okay.
Australia.
They built Australia. That's right. Absolutely.
And Georgia.
I think the Puritans would count too. I think the Pilgrims that came over were kind of pushed out, right? So yeah, all right. So it does work in that sense. It's human nature to do well, to strive, but we have to allow them to do that. And when we prop them up and we put crutches, the situation only gets worse. And look, we have record numbers of incarcerated people at this point. What are we going to do, Michael? Especially in a global world. People who are out of work right now are scared. And they're scared because they may not get back to work because there's outsources to India and China. And China is a big place. And there's a lot of people who work there. And a lot of people in China who work for a lot less than Americans. What do you do?
That's right.
Do you put up trade barriers all over? That won't work. We've tried that. So you're going to have people in the United States that don't have jobs. Good people who have never been in prison. Competing against people who have been in prison. And you see who's going to win there. We need to create some grassroots private enterprise to...
Now, as I hear you talking, I hear the vague echoes of sort of a laissez-faire capitalist. Is that a true definition? That you basically want the government to get out of your way, that maybe the government is good for printing up your passport, but other than that, and defending the shores from whomever, and I know you're big, obviously.
I have an affiliation.
Homeland Security, but...
And I do, and security,
Have you not lost faith in the last 2 years in the laissez-faire, Ayn Rand, Greenspan capitalism?
No, and I think we've had this conversation before. My faith in capitalism comes from, an 18th century version of what capitalism was.
Explain that to us. We're not sure. I'm not sure.
Adam Smith would have looked at capitalism today and saw something that was a government corporate nexus, I believe. And I liken, say, our markets today to fantasy football. We're all familiar with fantasy football, of course, right? And we all have a lot of fun with that. And in a nutshell, what fantasy football is that folks like you and I will pick certain members of certain different teams. You know, say Packers, say you have the quarterback for the Packers and I have a running back for the Vikings. And if we were to watch a game, I'd be rooting perhaps for, that running back, even though I'm a Packer fan, the running back on the Vikings. So we have different members of different teams. So we lose sight that the game is against, or originally posed that is, the game was originally posed that the Vikings were going to play the Packers. But we wind up, you and I, rooting for different members of each team, as if the goal of the game was not for the Vikings to beat the Packers to beat the Vikings, but for the running back of the Vikings to have 2 or 3 touchdowns and the quarterback to have 3 passing touchdowns. They become derivatives off of the game. In time, reductio ad absurdum, reduced to the level of absurdity, we wind up a whole stadium full of fans and no one's rooting for the teams. We're rooting for individuals on each team. So the goal of the game shifts. And if you put that to what Adam Smith posed as capitalism, and you look at capitalism today, what we do is we look at corporations as if they were really just playing a game in the stock market, and the derivatives coming off of them are the ones that we bet on. And by the way, fantasy football is a betting game. You see, so the correlations are interesting. And you know what it is, Michael? It's human nature that creates that. It's nothing sinister or evil or unethical, not greed or whatever you want to pose to it. What it is just our human nature. We get bored, we try to maximize things, we try to win at gambling, we win at games, and that's what that is.
Okay, but your Adam Smith also wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, in which he talked about the need for fellow feeling.
1756 it was published, that's right.
In which you have to have some sense, not of the individuals, but of the team.
Right.
Plus, the very teams that you're betting on, the very individuals you're betting on, are playing ball in stadiums that guys like me who are taxpayers built. So does that go against doesn't the modern capitalism and even old Adam Smith go against your view of every man for himself?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, and Adam Smith has often looked at and said, or rather has been looked at, as that the moral sentiments and the wealth of nations are juxtaposed to one another, and I've read both of them cover to cover several times and referenced them, God knows how many times, and I don't think they have. I think they're together. They're a dual volume. Good economics leads to moral sentiments. I'll give you for example. All right. Let's look at, let's say I were to, say I was on some public assistance. Let's say I broke my leg and couldn't work, all right? By the way, people who are self-employed don't have the luxury of if they get hurt, guess what? They're not going to get paid.
Right.
People say, well, I don't take a lot of vacation. Well, when I take vacations, I don't get paid. I'm not producing when I'm taking a vacation, although the BlackBerries and iPhones and laptops help out a little bit. So let's just say I'm on public assistance somehow. I broke my leg, all right? In an old world, my sense of community would say that my neighbor might be helping me out,
sure.
My relatives. So what happens is the family bonds get thicker. They get closer because I know that I don't exist in this world by myself. If I fail, I have a network of people around me that will help me. All right? Is that a fair assessment of what it was once? Okay, so the bonds between community, faith, a small community, a larger community, we're always going to look for assistance. That means I always have my eye out for my friend, my neighbor, my fellow parishioner, say, in some faith-based group. Mm-hmm. And that means that I'm communal. I have a sense of community. When I take